Guys, anyone who needs some seats? Wiggles, Greg Dane. Can they hear at the back?
Get a whole lot of chairs. No, you can't hear. Yeah. How's it? Be okay. I think it's filter forward. Yeah, it's kind of forward.
Shall I start trying to get attention? Through, there are 1 or 2 spare seats in the front here if anyone wants to work their way forward. Greg Dane, Bruce Wiley, can you take a seat, please? Just going to give everyone a couple more seconds just to take a seat and then we'll get going. Okay, welcome everybody. I think let's get going. So good evening and welcome. My name's John Holly and tonight I'll be your Master of Ceremonies. Let's get the boring bit out the way. If you need the toilet and you haven't found it yet, it's out the back on the left. And please, the support for Alex and Ren. I just need to show you these books. There are obviously 1 or 2 people whose eyes aren't as sharp because I've been asked to sign 1 or 2 books already. I'm not Alex. I'm slightly taller. But Changing a Leopard's Spots, a phenomenal book written by Alex and Ren. And it is on show at the back left there. So please, by all means, support. And then the other one is the tracker manual. If you're a budding tracker and you back yourself as a tracker, this is one of the best books. So please, by all means, do buy and do support. So I had the honor of working alongside Alex and Ren whilst I guided at Londolozi many years ago. And I will give you a brief background on these 2 great men. Undoubtedly, 2 of the great trackers on the global stage. And I mean, I don't think they need much of an introduction, but Renias comes from a dynasty of trackers. The irony is that, and I don't say this lightly, he's most likely one of the greatest trackers in the world right now. He was born and bred in the Greater Kruger area. It was Dixie Village, just north of the Sabi Sands. And as I said, the irony is that I think from when Ren could walk, he was out tracking. And his brothers are probably as good, if not better. Hey, Ren, is that a fair thing to say? So Almon Mhlongo, who James Hobson at the back there tracked with, became famous for his role in some of the videos that we all, or some of us grew up watching, Silent Hunter and the like, Almon Mhlongo, and Phineas Mhlongo, who's not as renowned, but probably actually perhaps even better. And much better. and Ren's dad was apparently on another level. So I think, when I think of Ren, he's an unsung hero. He's a man with an uncanny sixth sense in the bush. And it's a marvel to be out in the wild with Renias. And it's that uncanny sixth sense which, no doubt, actually, I think saved my life once. In a crazy elephant encounter we had at Londolozi. But Ren was about a decade into his, sterling career at Londolozi, when this young upstart with long blonde locks arrived at a young, ripe age of 19 from Plettenberg Bay, and that was Alex Mojumban van den Heever. But Shan Vati, who's one of the owners, was not interested in having a 19-year-old at the lodge. And she was not actually interested in even employing him, from what I'm told. And so she decided to put him through his paces. And so Jums had to live in a caravan, very much dilapidated caravan in 40-degree heat for more than a year. But I don't think that was the worst of it. Jums he's called Majumban. And Majumban means little feet. This is what the trackers called him. But, I mean, I think everyone here in the audience knows that, you know, when people talk about little feet, it also means other things. So poor Jums arrived, and there wasn't a lady in sight who wanted to know anything to do with this caravan. And there wasn't a tracker in sight who wanted anything to do with this surfer boy from Plettenberg Bay. But there's something that Ren saw. And I must say, obviously, 30 years on, it's very easy to now, understand what Ren saw. But Alex is equally renowned and equally respected around the world. And probably one of the greatest trackers globally. And between them, they've traveled to track grizzly bears in Yellowstone Park, wolves in Yellowstone. I think it's pumas in Patagonia. They've even done kangaroos in Australia. That's a very dangerous one. But it's a relationship which is very unique. And it's far deeper than just a simple track and find. It goes far beyond that. And tonight, we are going to be hearing in the initial part of the evening on the power of relationships. And that talks to this very special relationship that Alex and Renias have developed. It's, as I said, far deeper than a simple track and find. And it's something that I think we as South Africans are all striving to try understand and to find. And they are a fantastic example of us as a community and to corporates as to how you can get that balance to work so incredibly well. And so we will hear about that power of the relationship, and then we equally thereafter will delve into a very interactive session on tracking. And I'll perhaps get into a bit more detail on that later. But for now, if I can welcome and introduce Alex and Ren.
Can you hear me? Good. Thanks, John. Thanks for that very kind and flattering introduction. I'm not quite sure what to think. Se andikumbele kuvutisa. Isako uterisa isintowana isingagi yako koma mbeulo. Austisisa mlungu. The relationship between my thumb and my forefinger allows me to pick up the seed over here and to so access its potential. My thumb alone cannot do it, and my forefinger won't, but together makes it a relatively simple task. I'd like to share with you this evening of how such a relationship has massively benefited my life and how you too, perhaps, can also share in this power. Before I do this, though, I'd just like to take a few moments to set the scene. I was a young, as you've heard, boyish, but some people did say quite good-looking young 19-year-old when I arrived at Londolozi Game Reserve to become a game ranger. But as unsure of myself and as green as any 19-year-old could be. In fact, I grew up at the coast, hundreds of kilometers away from the bushveld, and I knew nothing about this new environment that I'd come to work in. On the other hand, this man over here, you're going to get to hear from him. His name, wait for it, his name is Matanjana Jampechis Mafofinko Matsuna Mhlongo. Or you can just call him Ren. And he was born right in the heart of what is today the Kruger National Park, Greater Kruger Park, in a mud hut underneath a jackalberry tree. And he's probably one of the last people alive today to be raised on the original traditions of a Shangaan hunter-gatherer. I've personally seen Renias follow a leopard's track, which is no bigger than that, through thick bush, tall grass, for 2 hours, and then use the ultra subtle call of a bird making an alarm call up ahead to help him find that animal. Renias, in that bushveld environment, is just completely at ease and totally confident. Now, Renias and I come from very different backgrounds. Some may say polarized backgrounds. I am a white 14th generation South African. My great-great-grandfather, this man over here, Oom Dankie van der Heever, was the politician who introduced Afrikaans into the Cape Parliament in the late 1800s as an official language. If you look at the sash that he's got across his chest, it says, Lang lewe onze taal. Long live our language. Oom Dankie, his entire life, fought the British for his language and his culture. Again, however, on the other extreme, Renias is a black. That day, Renias' father, Judas Mklongo, decided to join them to go out into the bush. They spent the whole day with the cows in the bush, and slowly, as Renias was really panicking, they got halfway through, they heard the hippo call, he wanted to let go again. He said, you don't let go, you're going to get hippo food. And they kept going, and they got onto the northern bank. Renias' father was still in Bushbuck Ridge trying to get the permit.
In 1969.
And the chief invited them in and gave them a place to stay, and that was the year of 1969.
So is namtan kulma kan ngai that's some digs since November 1969. Even today, that's some digs.
And as I stand here today, that is my home still in Dixie since 1969. Thank you very much. Approximately 25 years later, and at a private game reserve in Mpumalanga, Londolozi, Ren and I get thrown together. Become ranger and tracker to take paying guests out on safaris, to go and look for animals, mostly with international travelers. And I think the head ranger of the time assigned me to the most experienced tracker to try and offset this imbalance of inexperience, because as I alluded to earlier, I had very little value to add to that job at that time. The reason I could do it, there were two reasons. Number one, I could speak English. So I could, to some extent, I could interpret that safari. Number two, I knew how to drive that Land Rover. But for most of the rest, Renias was in total control. And I realized at some point in those early phases that if I had any remote chance of becoming a successful game ranger, that I needed to start building a rapport, a relationship with this man that I'd begun working with. And so he started to teach me, taught me about the birds, made me wear hot pants, and, and opened my eyes to the world of wildlife tracking, taught me about the subtleties of animal behavior, but most importantly, started to teach me about his culture, that of a rural Shangaan person. And I remember we'd been working together for about 2 or 3 months when I got to learn my very first lesson as a young game ranger, a lesson taught to me by a leopard, but very much facilitated by Renias. We had a group from Canada. They were a family. They lived in Toronto. They came to Londolozi. Told me they'd spent their whole lives saving to come to Londolozi with the express purpose of seeing a leopard. And as some of you may or may not know, Londolozi markets itself as the premier leopard viewing destination in Africa. So there's always a lot of pressure on the guides and trackers to find these cats for the guests. Our Canadians were with us for 3 nights. By the 3rd evening, we didn't even look like finding a leopard. The old man of the family went to the general manager, told the general manager he wanted another ranger and tracker because they had lost confidence in us. But we were full, so they were stuck with us. I ran up to Ren's room and I told him we got a problem here. He says he'll dream about it, he'll get an idea in the night, he tells me. Like in the most offhand way. Don't worry about it, we'll work it out tomorrow. I'll find the leopard in my dreams, he told me. I went to bed. I did not sleep that night. As John said, I was in my caravan. It's 43 degrees outside. The mozzies were biting, and I was most stressed I'd ever been. I thought this job was supposed to be a cool bush job. There was more stress there than I thought any other job could ever give you. Anyway, next morning, we met a bit earlier, to discuss a plan. And we decided we were going to head way down onto the south of the reserve to a dry riverbed called the Tugwan, which is good leopard country. Ren told me as he'd come down from the village that the tractor driver had told him 3 days ago he'd seen a leopard there. Anyway, we headed out of camp. I'm driving the Land Rover. I've got my 6 Canadians on the back. Ren's sitting on the front on the tracker seat. And as the wheels of the Land Rover dip into this riverbed, Ren's sitting on the front. He starts to bash on the bonnet like this. Bah! He says, Yima. He says, stop. He says, wait. And he points down. And I got out and I stopped the car, got out and I walked around. And Renias knelt down. And he drew with his finger like this around this most inconspicuous little mark on the ground. This little smudge on the ground. Says to me, ewe, mkonzele, iwa tugwana. Mkonze ifambi sheshe, bukahle. Ifambi sheshe nampunzi, ayilanzi. He says, these tracks are of the Tugwan female leopard. He says, let's track her. This is her over here. He says, the tracks are fresh. As he said the word Tugwan, this memory flooded into my mind. We'd watched this leopard a few weeks before when she was attacked by a lioness, but she somehow managed to squirm and spin, hit this lioness and make an escape. This leopard had handled lions before, which is very unusual, especially for the smaller females. Now, what was interesting about this leopard was that on most days, she was totally calm and accepting. She'd virtually brush herself up against the vehicle as she went along. Guests could take as many pictures, no problem. Then on other days, she'd be lying under a bush, and I'd stop, and invariably a guest would say, can we get closer for a better picture? And being a young, enthusiastic ranger, I'd say, of course we can. And I'd go, and this leopard would start to stare and growl, and then you knew trouble was coming. This leopard was beautiful and dangerous all at the same time. They were like an ex-girlfriend I once had. No. Okay, so what would normally happen if we found fresh tracks like that? Ren would take the rifle and the handheld radio and he'd put it on his belt, and he'd physically go and track follow that trail into the bush and go and try and find that animal. And then he'd send me in the Land Rover with a guest to drive around to the next road, and then he would call me on the radio if he found anything. That's what would normally happen. And I hated that. I wanted to be there, not with a guest. And by the way, 2 of the guests are here. So, sorry, Rad Heather. But this day was different. He invited me to come along with him. I remember my head swelling as I hauled the rifle off the rifle rack. I winked at my guests, I'm going to go and find you a leopard, like I did it every day. This was the first day. Now, my job on this trekking expedition we were about to go on, this first one, I had the rifle, and after all, I'd been on the Cleve Cheney Advanced Rifle Handling course. Thankfully, Renias had never seen the results of that course, so we've never been contracting. But more importantly, my job was to be the eyes of the operation. Because as Ren would track, he'd be looking for the spoor on the ground. My job was to look up, so that if we got close to the animal, hopefully I'd spot her so we didn't get too close. We told our guests, our Canadians, you stay on the car, you're safe. And we'll be back. The tracks came off the bank of the Tugwan River bed and headed downstream, and we set off. I had the rifle, Ren was following, and I was trying to keep up my side of the deal to prove to him that it was a good idea to bring me. And I was looking in all the bits of shade and so on, and Ren was following, and we kept going. We must have moved 15, 20 meters down the riverbed when I noticed Ren's whole body language had started to change. And I remember thinking to myself, I wonder what he knows that I don't. And we kept going, and it was a beautiful, warm summer's morning. Thick bush on either side, either bank, lots of places for leopards to hide. Birds were calling. It was like paradise that morning. Warm, humid morning. And we kept going. As we got further and further down the donga, He went slower and slower until he stopped again, and he drew another circle with his finger around another track. But this track was perfectly clear. It didn't take a tracker to identify this. He says to me, he says, these tracks have walked now. I think he meant the leopard. He says, these tracks have walked now. He says, this animal is close by. The donga made like an S bend. There was a bend, a piece, and then another bend. We get around the first bend, and about 80 meters, 60, 80 meters down the riverbed, we start to hear a tree squirrel make an alarm. We had just seen an African hawk eagle come over. So we weren't certain was the squirrel alarming at the eagle, or in fact was the leopard that close. There were a few logs that had been washed down from the previous year's flood. I step on the log, and as I take my next step, this leopard just explodes out of the bush at me. I cannot tell her teeth from her tail. She comes side to side. Now I back off, and I fall over the log. My rifle gets smashed out of reach. This animal comes screaming up and slams on brakes with one paw on the log I just tripped over. Sand hits me in the shins. She's right over me. I can smell her breath. Her tail is just lashing from side to side like this. I had no doubt her next move was just to bite me in the throat. I'm speaking slowly, but this is happening fast. Renias off to the left. He says to me, "Emma Jomban, Hima." He says, he used to call me my Jomban, means small boots, not little feet, small boots. He says, "Unga buka antiku." He says, "Don't look her in the eyes." So I look down, and he says to me, "Hima." He says, "Stop." And I thought, well, I'm not going anywhere. In the meantime, this animal's coming again, and more sand's hitting me on the shins, and I'm just waiting for that final impact. He says to me, "Oh, okay. He says, "Come back slowly." So I hesitated, and I thought, I'm not so sure this is the right advice. So he says, "Hey, I'm fine. Hey, young boy, come back." So I thought, let me test this, and I just moved my foot. And she came again like this, and I shook my head. I said, this is not working. And she literally had me pinned. He says to me, "Hama Jomban, Tana Hanza." He says, "Come back." And I just thought, well, I'm in no position to start negotiating. I move my bum in the sand, just like that. And I notice this leopard starts to relax. Oh, great, this is working. He says, Katsongo, slowly. Slower. Eventually, I got back. He says he wants to tell you what really happened. He wants to tell you what happened. He says, this young boy is very arrogant. And he doesn't listen. But actually the problem is with him. I've never taught Alex how to deal with an angry leopard before.
So, nilakutiva kangwela nkwirula. Ku shana na. U jonzima staff wena.
He says, he wants to ask you, do you train the people that work for you how to handle dangerous situations? If you don't teach them how to handle dangerous, they're also going to get eaten like Alex was nearly eaten in the donga. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Red. Oh, did you not get that? Oh, you did? Oh, that's interesting. Okay. Seeing Renias' competence, seeing the way he supported me that morning, made me feel like I could really trust him. But I had to see it first. And especially in this country and in these economic times where distrust and suspicion is so much a part of our society, we all need to work so much harder at showing our trustworthiness, just like Ren did that morning in the donga. I know you'd like to say a few things here, Ren. Alex and I have walked a long, long journey. 28 years we have been together. The only reason we have stayed together is because we've taught each other what we know.
So your marker hi kotile ku hi yo mhaka leyi nga famba yoho hi kotile ku humesa misi leyi.
If we did not walk the journey that we have had, would not have started the Tracker Academy NGO as an example.
Se lela vula ku le ka n'we swi ta va na n'wi fambe i gwendzo ro leha.
If you want to form a relationship with somebody who is different to you, you've got to understand it takes time.
U nga fambi u phuse kofi laha swi hele kwalaho swi ta va mi famba i ndlela ku leha nkarhi wun'we mi karhi mi endla xilo xin'we hinkwenu ka n'wina.
You can't form relationships with people different to you over a cup of coffee.
Se yo mhaka especially ka ndhawu ya hina swi ta va hi kota ku ve ni hi hlangana hi vi xilo xin'we.
Especially considering the history that we've had as a country, it's going to take a lot more effort. In fact, you're going to have to get uncomfortable in order to form relationships with people and understand people who are different to you.
A swi tiva swi humela ndzhaku hala ni vula ku nge tlhela ku tlhela i practice hansi swi humelelile a hi rivaleni a hi fambeli gondzo rin'we hinkwerhu ka hina hi long journey hi famba yona.
I know that the past is painful for many people, but we have to focus on going forward and find common ground with people that we work with and who we live with.
Se a swi veki ndzhaku leswiya swi ndlulile.
Let's leave behind what we have gone through.
A hi bokeli ka mahlweni hinkwerhu ka hina.
Let's form a new track going forward
Hi famba ndlela yo leha hinkwerhu ka hina.
and understand that the investment in this country means a long-term investment of its people.
Okay, xa ku hetelela ni na ku tshemba ku loko ho endla swi hinkwerhu ka hina ni na ku tshemba ku hi nga ve hi ri kahle ka tiko ra South Africa. Hi lava hi famba gondzo ro leha.
If we can all do that, we can change the trajectory of this country in a single generation. Thank you very much, Ren. Thank you. Thanks, Ren. After the leopard experience, I got a bit better dealing with big cats on foot. Later, Renias invites me to come and stay with him in Dixie. And something extraordinary happens there, but I don't have time for that tonight. I then take Renias, having never been to Hazy View, let alone Johannesburg, I take Ren to London with me for 2 weeks. And some pretty cool stuff happens there too. So that would bring together the full power of relationships presentation, which we don't have, unfortunately, time for now. But what I would like to share with you is, and lots of people ask, how do you form these relationships? And I'd just like to share very briefly with you a model that was created by a woman called Professor Frances Frey from Harvard University after having studied Uber, which she considered one of the most fraught companies in the world from a trust perspective. And she's come up with 3 core drivers, and they go very nicely to developing diverse relationships that need to be in place in order to form a high-trust, long-term relationship, especially with somebody who's different to you. The first is logic. This will become clear to you as you go. The first is logic. You've got to ask yourself, as a person trying to form a relationship with somebody else, how logical am I? What kind of perception do I give off of the quality of my judgments, the quality of my competence? How well am I communicating? How logical really do my colleagues think I am? Okay, that's the first one. The second is authenticity. This is a word I don't particularly like. I think it gets used too easily, but this is about how real am I really, and how safe is the work environment, the family environment, how conducive is it for people to be uniquely them? Human beings, we are all trackers, and we will pick up in a heartbeat when someone is being inauthentic, and we see it every day. And people know who's being inauthentic, they know who are wearing the mask, and they may not say anything, but it undermines trust slowly. And then the last is empathy. We all know about what empathy, how empathetical are we? How much do we care about the human being versus their output? I'll say that again. How much would we care about the human being versus the output? I think we'd all agree now that our valuable colleagues at work are those who produce a quality output. We've got to get beyond that. And the story I have just told today about the leopard was all about me finding the fact that Renias was highly trustworthy when it came to sound judgments, logic, particularly in a difficult circumstance. Later on, years later, this became evident in our relationship. And even later, that became evident in our relationship. And if you can get all these three things right, that's the foundation for a high trust relationship, especially with somebody who is different to you. And this is a very robust model. If you've got the time, Google Francis Frey's TED Talk of about 15 minutes. It's a very, very telling message he's got to tell, and a model that she's given permission for Renias and I to use. All right. Okay, so we are halfway. Are there any questions? If you would like to have a quick go and get another drink, we'll be back in 5 minutes. Okay. The Canadians, yes, good question. And the old man of the group heard the leopard growling, got on the radio and told everybody that Alex and Renias were being eaten. But so we couldn't take anybody to go look at that leopard, but another ranger found a more friendlier leopard, and we went and they saw that one. Yeah.
Guys, can we start coming in, please, and taking a seat? Can everyone start slowly making their way in, please? Jumps, will you? Guys, sorry, we need to start taking some seats, please. Guys at the back, if you can hear me, please.
Yeah, we did. You got to do one with us, okay?
Yeah.
In fact, I'm going to take Alex with me on the next one.
No, she's the new talking.
Just come back from Ghana as well.
Oh, have you?
Yeah,
I love that place.
Your grandson.
Well, she's good, so she tried to come with
Okay, guys, we're going to get going. Greg Dane, Nick Leavesley, Walty, come take a seat, please. Easty, take a seat, please. Okay, guys, so I'm sure you've gathered from the way things have gone so far. Tonight is really just to give you an idea, a taster of what Alex and Ren really represent, and you know, some of the incredible workshops and talks, you know, that they do offer. If I kind of think of some of my happiest memories, it's out in the bush with Alex and Ren, and well, we had a couple of nights where we actually just slept out there living off the land, and they taught us how to dig for water, etc., etc. And we'd go to bed at night, and Alex and Ren would be, you know, sleeping somewhere slightly away from us, and they'd be like giggling teenagers, just giggling and giggling, talking long stories in Shangaan, and you had no idea who was the Shangaan and who was actually, you know, the boy from Plettenberg Bay. And it's a really special relationship. And, you know, as Ren said, it's taken time to really evolve to what they have. But they have some phenomenal insights that they can offer, I think, you know, so much, so many of us kind of corporate South Africans. So in 2009, Ren alluded to it earlier, but Alex and Ren founded a non-profit organization called Tracker Academy. And really, the idea behind it is to help sustain the ancient art of tracking. And it's been an absolutely phenomenal success. And really what they've done is they've managed to find, through different contacts, underprivileged people in and around wildlife areas who are looking to try uplift themselves. And through this non-profit, these different, let's call it students, are given the opportunity to study. And it's a very hardcore curriculum where they are away from their families for a year by themselves, 6 months in the Karoo, because the terrain and the wildlife there is obviously very different, and then 6 months in the Lowveld. And in the 14 years, I think they've had 94 or 96% success rate. Because of the respect that the industry has for what Alex and Ren stand for and the standards that they strive for, 94%, 96% of those students have been placed and found employment at the premier reserves across South Africa. And Tracker Academy has obviously been the success because of what Alex and Ren have stood for in terms of those standards. But I think it was in that time, these many years of kind of tutorial, that they realized that tracking is far more it's a great metaphor for life. And in that time, I remember Jum's, saying to me, "Now I'm going to put together this platform, and when we're going to do an interactive track." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, good luck, Jums. Let's see how this plays out." And then he's done it. It took many years, but I guess there are three kind of pillars to the success of what the success of this is. And really, the main one is, as I said, it's a metaphor for life, and it's an enabler for discussions. Alex and Ren actually did it for, I've got a boutique safari company, and they took our company through it, and it was an enabler for discussion, and actually, it doesn't matter, what you're doing in that tracking, but the aspect which is bubbling to the surface ultimately boils through, and they enable that discussion, and it's very fun. It's interactive. Your team has great fun, and then they ultimately do these fireside chats, which opens everything up. Anyway, I think that's some decent background for Alex and Ren to kind of take over.
Am I on? Yeah, thank you. Thanks very much, John. Okay, so this next little piece is called Tracking Success. We developed it, as John said, a few years ago. It materialized fast during the COVID years, or the COVID year, when we wanted to take people tracking virtually. And so what we did was we went in the bush for a few weeks, and we filmed ourselves tracking. And we filmed the good, the bad, and the ugly. And then we came back to the editing suite, and we edited it down into a story. And it's an unfolding story. It's a little bit like, I'm sure some of you will remember, the Choose Your Own Adventure books. You can go and answer the telephone and then go to page 96 type thing. We filmed it in a way that you can design where you go. It's you make the decisions and you live with the consequences. But before I do that, let me just talk a little bit about what tracking is and why we use tracking. Tracking, we've spoken a lot about it, but I haven't really explained what it is. It's the study of animal signs. It's the use of these signs to generate and create a story about what an animal is doing without even having to see it. And we track these days, historically, and we don't know how old tracking is. It could be 20,000 years old. It could be 100,000 years. We've got evidence to about 20,000 years with Bushman paintings showing drawings of tracks and so on. And in those times, people made use of the art of tracking to find food for survival. And it's been written that the art of tracking is in fact the origin of science, because it was the first time that human beings were forced to make use of deductive reasoning and to form hypotheses on the fly, and to become really analytical towards an outcome. Today, we use tracking in ecotourism to track leopards in places like Londolozi, and in many ways, the ecotourism industry has been a huge factor in the revival of this ancient skill, which we believe we've lost the majority of over the last 60 years. As people were moved away from their homes, like Ren, and with the rapid urbanization that's happened around, a worldwide trend, people have moved out of rural areas to cities, and it's meant that people just don't track as much as they used to. But we use tracking in ecotourism, we use tracking in anti-poaching efforts. Tracker Academy trains young men and women as rhino guardians, and they get and you wouldn't believe it, but we became the first ones to train anti-poaching personnel in tracking. You'd think tracking would come first. But in our country, the mentality is to train people with guns and build high fences. When in fact, we should be tracking, because that's how it's part of African heritage. It's how you get to the hearts and minds of people. It's how you find out what animals are doing without having to disturb them. And it represents an ancient art born here in Africa. So why don't we use it? And so Renias and I wake up every morning with one agenda, and that is to to grow and restore the ancient art of tracking. And we think that this little tracking success virtual adventure is one small way to popularize it and give it meaning, and to get people interested in connecting with nature through this ancient skill. So the trackers themselves operate in environments that are vast. They are wordless. There's no signposts. There are no consultants to talk to. There are no algorithms. AI plays no role. And to this day, we don't know if probably one day it will, but right now it does not. And most importantly, it's wild. The animals that these people track cannot be commanded to reveal themselves. So you are dealing with an interesting environment which causes a huge amount of uncertainty. And it's what the business world and in many of our own personal lives are dealing with, uncertainty. And uncertainty brings fear, and it causes us to behave in certain ways. Now, trackers deal with uncertainty as their jobs every single day. And there's a process to dealing with this, which I'm going to share with you a bit later on. So that is why we think that tracking represents a powerful metaphor. In whatever you're tracking, whether you are tracking a lion, a grizzly, a project, a customer, your loved one, the process is the same. So, how did we do this? I've already alluded to this slightly. We went in the bush. We were lucky. We had our friend James Boone on the far right there, who's a South African, who's one of the lead cameramen on Survivor USA. And he brought a team, and they followed us around, as I say, for a few weeks. And they followed us into dangerous situations, into all kinds of situations. They just captured on film what we were doing. And during that time, we tracked elephants, rhino, lion, and leopard. So once we had then synthesized all this footage and created the story, we now get to a situation whereby we can play you a scenario in the form of a video that sets up a problem. And then in your groups, if there are people in groups or individually, you have a discussion about what you would like to do. Would you like to follow the lion or the rhino, for example? And then you make your decision. And those discussions are very rich. And they're interesting because from the janitor to the CEO, most people haven't been tracking. So it flattens the hierarchy, which is quite nice. And it means you can have really cool conversations about what you should do. And often, more creative people often have some pretty interesting ideas about how to navigate and what decisions they would take if they were in the tracker's shoes. And effectively, that's what we're going to do tonight. And I'm going to do one decision with you so you can get a taste, as John says, of what tracking is. We're going to put you in the boots of a master tracker. We're going to put you in Ren's boots, and we're going to ask you to make the same decisions that he made on the day. So the animal we are going to track today, Ren, if you want to come up and tell us about, we're going to track a lion today. Okay? And Ren is going to tell you about what tracking a lion is like. So just before you start, why this is important is that the best trackers in the world know the most about the animals that they pursue. You can be a great tracker in that you can observe and identify refined and obscure signs, but if you don't know what that animal is doing, if you don't know the nature of that animal, you can only go so far. And so it's important to know that which you follow. Sorry, Ren.
Yeah, so ingala yi kota ku twa ngopfu yi kota ku vona ngopfu leswi ntlangu izungu nga fikuswa na yo.
When you track a lion, you have to be listening, you have to be stopping, you have to be checking the wind, because all the lion senses are highly developed.
You of
course have to know what their tracks look like on hard ground, in soft ground, through grass, over stony substrates.
Because
underneath their feet they're soft-footed animals, so often they tread very lightly, and it can be very difficult to see their footprints.
ntsena a voni nchumu ntiwa ti voni
Sometimes you just see a scuff mark from the main pad.
sometimes ta vona inani ile nga fe ibloko byanyi ngambi ko
Sometimes you can see the grass very faintly bent over where they've walked.
se sa u tiva swa ku byele bya byi tise nghala leyi nga famba ko
And you've got to know, did a lion walk there through the grass or did a zebra walk through the grass?
and futhi loko karhi u famba la a wu famba ntsena swa wingisela swa ku ku ri layini masete ya wena swi kota ku twa yi nga yi kwini u famba nje
You can't keep your head down. If you keep your head down too much, eventually you're going to find a foot in that track. You've got to keep your head up and you've got to keep looking and anticipating where you think that animal has gone. And also, when your head is up, you're obviously a lot more alert and your awareness is far more.
swin'wanyana futhi swa tiva ku ni byi ni khale ya xiharhi xiya ku swa endla ku landza kuma swa ku byele byala leyi nga tlhela ku byi fanele nghala liya
Where they've slept, where they've marked territory, you need to know those signs of the lion.
xin'wanyana futhi lexi fanele u karhi u endla lalo u landza u karhi u yingisela timhaka ta bonga so
You've got to also be listening to some of the other animals that are making calls.
se i karhi i bonga yi ta la yingisela sweswo a yi ri planning hala
And if you get too close and you don't know it's there, you'll hear that.
so loko u nga yingiseli byo fika kusuhani ka wena
So you must be listening very carefully all the time.
yi ta maka swo swa taniya
Got it. Keep going. Is there anything else?
ya so hi leswi la ta swa nga leswaku ku yini a swi wu landza njhe swa u tiva swa mukondzo yi maka ku yini a yi lula swa u buka hansi hi yo mhaka sweswi swa kwaleni leji
It's not straightforward. The information is not always there. You're making many predictions as you go along. But when you meet that lion, if that lion does charge you, your only chance of survival is to stand dead still. That lion fears your courage. And that's your only chance of getting away unscathed.
se xin'wana futhi a wu tivisa hi kuma kwini swa endla kuma swa ku yi le kule eMozambique leyi a yi kusuhani
Sometimes they walk long distances. They can cross into Mozambique.
se swi nga endla ku yi kuma swi nga yi kuma
Sometimes you find them and sometimes you don't. Thank you very much, Red.
ta manyana
Yeah, Tom. Okay, thank you, Ren. All right, this is what happens sometimes. We filmed this just the other day. I'll give you a sense of how you deal with a lion. You see there, we actually advanced on that lion. We're telling that lion that we're not scared. And the reason that lion reacted like that is he was mating with a female and we disturbed him. I think humans would react like that too. And so you've got to be putting yourself in the shoes of the animal, understanding the animal, because that's what keeps you safe. It's not that rifle. The rifle does not keep you safe. In fact, we filmed this whole thing without a weapon. What keeps you safe is your understanding of animal behavior and your alertness and your respect for the animal and this idea of being empathetic the whole time and trying to think about what the animal needs and where it would have gone and how it would respond to you. And every animal is just like every human being. They've got very, very unique personalities. Some are aggressive and some are not. And obviously, if you operate in a small area like, say, Londolozi, you start to learn as you encounter these animals how the different ones react. But if you suddenly go somewhere else and you track lions in the Zambezi Valley, for example, you're going to get a different reaction. The responses I've described and Renias has described are lions in the Southern Kruger National Park. And that can be very different in other areas where lions, for example, have been hunted. Okay, so I'm going to play you a video now. It's about a 2-minute video. It's going to end in a decision. And then I'm going to ask you to tell me, you can just by the way of hands, which decision you would like to make. Now, if we were working with a corporate audience here, you'd be in groups of 10 or 20 in a group. And you'd watch the video, and then you'd have a discussion for about 10 minutes, and then we would deconstruct that discussion, and then we play you the outcome. So you're going to see the outcome of your decision. Okay, here we go.
In the bush, getting up early has its rewards as lions will often roar just before sunrise. The lion is close and there's no time to lose.
This is the lioness that we were heard calling for when we were in the camp. This is her tracks right here, fresh tracks.
The tracks are fresh and the lioness is on the move. They like to walk along game paths or roads when they're moving quickly.
We're busy following this lioness's tracks. We've just, however, had the most surprising thing happen to us. A hyena came out of the bush at us.
It's rare for any predator to approach a group of humans on foot.
Can you feel it?
Renias suspects that it may also be tracking the lioness in the hope of finding an easy meal.
So we have a choice to make. Do we follow that hyena, because it may well be also tracking this lioness, and get there quicker? Or do we continue working this lioness's tracks?
Okay, Ren, you want to tell us the pros and cons of each decision? I think you're getting the drift. The one decision is to follow the hyena, the other, the lion tracks themselves, and Ren will tell you what the pros and cons of each. Maybe you can start with the hyena, Ren. The hyena is very clever. The hyena knows everything that's going on in the bush. So you need to be able to see. The hyena knows where everything is in the bush. And the hyena can easily take you to the lions that you are seeking, because the hyena may well be on a scent trail because it wants to steal the lion's kill. But the hyena could be on its way to the fence line to go and eat Renias' cows in Dixie, or goats in Dixie. But you don't know where the hyena is going. But it's a legitimate option to follow the hyena. It's a totally legitimate option. Okay, on the lion tracks, what do you think? The lion track is there. You know that the lion has been by virtue that the footprint is present. So that's tangible evidence that the lion has been there. But you don't know how far that lion has gone. It could walk into difficult terrain to follow, or it could cross the Mozambican border and you never find it. So you don't know. So you have these two options. It's a problem, and there's no right or wrong answers. It's just a consequence. And I'd be interested to know, just individually, who here would follow the hyena? A good 15 people, okay? And I assume, just put your hands up who would follow the lions. Yeah, okay. All right. Okay. This is a speculative decision. This is the decision the creatives will make. This is the decisions the attorneys and the accountants will make. It's more a literal decision. And I understand why people make that decision. But let's see what happens. Would you like to see? Yes. Okay. We'll play out the hyena first. Okay.
This is the best tracker in the animal kingdom, hyena.
Its sense of smell, hearing, and sight is acutely developed. The team is upbeat. They have used this tactic before to close the gap on lion.
What happened here is the old bones. The old bones.
The team is now tracking the hyena and lion. They are making good progress. Up ahead, they hear a baboon alarm call.
And we've also got a tree squirrel alarm just there. You must come watch ticket. You may be very close by. How beautiful is this? Being on foot with wild lions. Eh? So we don't bash about the bush, impacting on animals and disturbing them in their natural habitat. Our idea is to find them and move away and leave them in a peaceful state where they haven't run from us nor have they shown us any aggression. The best trackers in the world are able to achieve that consistently. And the more times we connect on foot with lions or with leopards, the more relaxed they become. They trust that we're not going to threaten them. We're not going to shoot them. We're not going to try and steal their meat or hurt their cubs or anything. They've slowly, over many years of refined, tenacious tracking, have now started to trust humans on foot. And this is very special, and there are very few places left in Africa where you have this type of relationship. This is the pinnacle of a genuine relationship between humans and animals.
Well done, hyena trackers. Well done. Yeah. Okay. Just put your hands up again, hyenas trackers. Could I ask you, why did you choose to follow the hyena?
Because I thought that it could save time, and I thought that time saved would still give me enough time to backtrack it.
Okay. So if you didn't hear, what's your name? Milda says that she chose the hyena because it was going to save her time, and also she felt that she could have the option of coming back to the tracks if she struck out on the hyena. So that was her decision. Okay, so let's have a look at what happens when you follow the lion tracks in this particular instance. Here we go.
The lioness is still following the road and she is moving at pace. Renias uses this as a real-time teaching moment to explain to Sam what the lioness is up to.
This lioness is walking fast. She may be far away.
When following at speed to close the gap, the tracker often loses the trail. This is a very natural part of the process. A good tracker has the skill and experience to get back on track and uses all the available signs to do so.
We lost the tracks briefly, but then Renias saw the direction from where the impala had been running, and that helped us get back onto the trail. Now an impala is alarmed. There's definitely something going on here.
The impala are on the other side of the river, and a normally dry riverbed is now full of hidden dangers. The team need to decide whether they cross the river or head back to the Land Rover.
If we were going to carry on, that would be the next decision that the lion trackers would have to make. Is do we go back to the vehicle? We would lose time. We were a long way from the vehicle. Or do we try and cross the river? And then stuff would happen there. So I think you get the sense of what it's an expanding narrative, a decision-making tree. And in the main virtual adventure, it looks something like this. We go tracking, this is one of them that we do. We go tracking white rhino and a calf with the express purposes of finding them. And then there are these options that start to come, and you can this becomes a dead end, or you follow the tracks, and then you get confronted with an option to follow lion, or you stay on the rhino. The lion represents a new, fresh opportunity, and so there's tension in each decision. And the conversations, as you get closer and closer to the end, they get more. There's more weight to the decisions. And we also, what we can do is we can gamify this by adding return on energy points to this, and you eventually have a winning team at the end for those corporates, most of the banking sector that want to make a competition out of it. And then what we do is we stop at intervals and we have campfire conversations. John alluded to this earlier, and that's where the real learning is. And I'll just introduce you to some of these campfire conversations that we regularly have throughout the virtual adventure, and it also depends on what purpose, what specific outcome the participants who are undergoing this virtual adventure want to get out of it. So we don't run all the campfires for everybody. It's usually 1 or 2, or maybe at the most 3, depending on how much time. But we do campfire conversations on discussing the tracker's mindset. What are the mindsets that go into making the expert or the master tracker a master tracker? And what are the traps that they avoid? And I'll actually share some of that with you now. Alarm calls. Alarm calls are regarded by the West as with a negative connotation. In fact, for trackers, alarm calls are really important, and they're seen in a positive light, because alarm calls help you to stay out of danger. They might help you to find the leopard. They may help you navigate the environment. And so what are the alarm calls going off in your life? And are you recognizing them, considering the busy lives you all work in and lead? Are you able to interpret those alarm calls if you indeed recognize them? And thirdly, most importantly, are you prepared to act on those alarm calls? For most of us, an alarm call is deeply inconvenient, and we get into that. Decision making. Trackers have a very unique way of making decisions, where they combine the facts with the landscape, with the animal's intention, and they answer those 3 questions. And they create a mental image of the animal's activity going on around them. And we can and if we applied the master tracker, the expert tracker's decision-making model in our own lives, it would result in longer, more sustainable decisions, as opposed to the snap decisions that most of us tend to make. Focus versus diffuse thinking. It's something I'll show you in a minute. That's another one. We do a campfire conversation on hardiness. What is hardiness? How do we develop it? Are we born with it, or can we grow it? Some of the best trackers in the world exhibit incredible hardiness. And we have an online assessment that we can actually understand your hardiness at an individual level. And we can walk you through that, and again bring in the tracking metaphor in that respect. Mastery. What are these expert trackers doing in their lives that have made them so good? And can we become masters in our own individual vocations? And what do they do? And it turns out there are 7 things they do. And we talk about that, and we talk about how we can develop mastery in our own lives. The core drivers of trust, which you saw earlier, that's another campfire conversation you can spend a lot of time on. So these are campfires that we have in and amongst the virtual adventure, where you've now opened people up and you give people an opportunity to talk about some of these interesting areas. I'm going to play to you a short video. It's a 3-minute video. We're coming to the end on one particular campfire conversation, which I made this video last week just to show you how trackers approach focus thinking versus diffuse thinking, and why those 2 modes of thinking are so helpful in our lives. Here we go.
In the world of decision making, there are 2 powerful modes of thinking that humans and even animal trackers rely on to navigate their environment. We call these focus and diffuse thinking. Focus thinking is like a zoom lens. It's when your mind narrows in on a single task. It's intense, detail-oriented. It requires deep work, perfect for solving specific challenges. Here's now an example of how trackers use focus thinking. The tracker finds an animal's track, and by recognizing specific features such as the oval toes, absence of claws, and the broad main pad, it can be identified as a lion's track. Now, they must use their knowledge to interpret what this means. What additional information can be gleaned? This requires scrutiny of every single detail to make a precise judgment. It's a lioness. It's walking fairly quickly. The evidence of the dove on top of the lion's track means it's from yesterday. And in a few brief moments, the tracker systematically analyzes the evidence and can now decide on an appropriate course of action. On the other hand, there's diffuse thinking. Think of it as a wide-angle camera lens, expanding your perspective beyond a single point of focus. Trackers use diffuse thinking to scan their surroundings and consider the bigger picture in order to understand the animal's intentions. This time, an example of a tracker using diffuse thinking. The lion tracker notices vultures circling in the distance. Then, remembers the herd of zebra on the clearing from the previous day's events. Tracks of sprinting zebra. Lions on the prowl. A picture starts to emerge of the possible activity. Now, the tracker must set aside the finer details of the trail and put their hypothesis to the test. The tracker finds the lions. Both modes of thinking have their place. Focus thinking lets you solve immediate problems, while diffuse thinking helps us see patterns, make connections, and find creative solutions to problems. The master tracker develops both, and they've learned to seamlessly transition between the two. This takes immense practice. So, just like skilled animal trackers, you too can learn to harness the power of focus and diffuse thinking to make better decisions in your own journeys.
A quick example of a campfire we can have using that content to talk about how we make decisions and how we leverage the power of both those thinking modes within our teams. Then lastly, I'd like to just share with you the tracking success pathway, which assumes you know what you're tracking. There are 5 components to this. The tracker has to find the right track, which means the freshest track, the one that's going to give us the best chance of reward, in amongst the melee of all those animal prints that are out there. That requires a very discerning mindset. The younger trackers, more inexperienced trackers, have a bias for action, and that's a trap, because if you make a wrong decision early on, you're going to be walking all day. The next component is, of course, to then follow that trail of evidence, and that requires a much more curious mindset. You've got to look for all, as Ren was describing earlier, all the various bits of evidence that these animals leave behind, some of which, and most of which are not recorded. So they come, and you've got to see them in the context as you go. Tracking is finding out as you go. The trap here is becoming hyper-focused, and we're all taught in the Western world to be focused, very focused, be focused, concentrate on one thing. Well, the tracker can't afford to be just focused, tunnel-focused. He or she has to open their mind at some cases in order to be able to see the evidence within the greater context of the landscape. The next is at some point you can never outwalk or outpace an animal. You've got to find innovative ways to leapfrog ahead, to close the gap on the animal. And that requires a very imaginative mindset. And what trackers do is, as I said earlier, they're asking, what is the data saying? What's the track evidence saying? They're asking, how is the landscape having an influence? For example, is there a waterhole up ahead that may draw the lions in that direction? Is there a clearing full of zebra that may draw the lions in that direction? So how is the landscape having an influence? And then lastly, what is the animal doing? Why is it going there? What's it doing? And the answers to those 3 questions help the tracker understand and create a mental picture of the activity. The trap there is hubris, basically arrogance. We see that in tracking a lot. The moment you start to get too clever, and because this is speculative, you end up losing the track. And losing the track is absolutely part of the process. No tracker, no matter their master or whoever, will ever follow and find something without losing the track at some point. But trackers do not become despondent with losing track. They see it as a learning opportunity. They see it as an opportunity to gather in more information. And they confront the brutal facts. It's an honest mindset. I am off track. How many people do we know that are pretending to do what they do? Or they're off track and everyone can see they're off track and they just don't have the wherewithal to say, you know what, I'm lost. I need help. The masters don't do that. They're the first to tell you. Renias will tell you when he's off track. He'll be the first one to say it. And of course, the trap there is denial, what I was saying. I'm fine. Even though I'm off the track, I'll make a plan. That's also not helpful. That's a trap. And then if you can do all these 4 things well enough for long enough, you're going to have an encounter. That's the ultimate. You find the thing you are looking for, the lion or the leopard or whatever it is that you're tracking. And the mindset there has to be one of gratitude. Deep respect for the process, love of the work, not just the outcome. And really enjoying the moment of discovery. And that you want, in the tracking parlance, you want the encounter to go well. You want that lion to not charge at you. You don't want it to run from you either. And the better these encounters go, the better the future tracking efforts will end up being. And the trap here is the obvious one of ego. So that's the tracking success pathway. That's another campfire conversation that we will use, and we break that apart, and there's a bunch of questions that go into all of that, and we can apply that model to anything that you are tracking. Okay, so to wrap up, what you'll get if you got Ren and I to run this for you is you'd have a fun and unusual experience. I'm repeating here what John said. It's an experience that will enable some pretty crucial conversations within your organization or even family. It's a powerful metaphor that can get you on the right path. And of course, you can start to have some pretty robust conversations about relationships, which I think we need to have in this country. And that is it for us, unless you'd like a story from Renias. That's all what you're going to get from us. Thank you very much. Would you like a story from Ren?
Me like the story.
Yes.
Okay.
Tell a story.
It's a Congo.
Some Congo. Okay.
And then I'm the story. One at some Dixie Congo.
Ren's going to give you his signature story. It's about a man called Congota.
Congota at some Dixie. Congo to home like Dixie.
Congota was a man who lived in Dixie. He was a prominent cattle farmer in the Dixie village, by the way, owns a big piece of natural bushland where some people have cows.
Okay, that is Samakola, Samakusuna Manual Game Reserve, where Manual Laguna Service Centrally.
Dixie is literally wedged between the Manualetti Game Reserve, which is Greater Kruger, and the Sabi Sands. It's right in the corner. And so, yeah, go on, Ren. Ren can throw a stone from his house into the reserve. A while ago, the fences of those reserves were pretty porous, and lions used to break out and come and kill Congota's cows. Congota was constantly setting wire snares to catch these lions. They were killing his cows. Other thing Congota really enjoyed doing is drinking mampur. One day, Congota went off to the neighboring village called Utah to the bar there to have a few toots. Congota did his thing there, came back to Dixie late at night with a half jack of mampur in his back pocket.
Look, I forgot
As Congota goes into his house, as he closes the door, he hears lions growling and he thinks to himself, I think I've caught a lion in my snare. Congota was in no condition to deal with a lion at that time. Congota woke up very early the next morning. It was cold, but Congota he had a bare chest and he was quite a well-built guy. He gets as many people of the village of Dixie that he can muster to go and check his trap.
Se vanhu va lava swa ipasile ngale se va kwasuka wafamba wayelile ngaleli.
And they all followed him out into the bush.
Indzaka khongota a ku na van'wana a va ku mashele i gqoke jazi lerikulu so a ku titimela vhele.
He had a friend called Marshall who was wearing a trench coat with no buttons. Kongod.
Gqoke a nga gqoka nchumu mali. A gqoke jeans ema-gumboots a nga gqoka nchumu mali.
Kongod's got no top on. He's got a pair of jeans and he's got a pair of gumboots. Marshall's got a trench coat with gumboots. Okay.
Se khongot i titlo se ya famba yale.
Kongod's got a spear and he leads the crowd out into the bush.
Se man do la ga ba ka makhatsela ka si ni se a ma rula in tsamo le bo so kwenta hi kwenta yele.
Renias was a young teenager. He thought today we're going to have action. So he climbed up the tree to get a nice view of what is going to go on there.
Se va famba kwa ba yale.
So they go off to go and see what's happening at the trap.
Mashele let's ga khongot bo famba la mashele famba la.
Kongod's in front, and his friend Marshall's behind him, and then the villagers are behind there.
Se khongot a fika so ngala fika ngale yupi yo mo tu sa
They come around the corner. They come around the corner. Indeed, there's a lion caught in a snare, and it's growling at them.
a ku nsinya wale sha red bush le shetle so khongot a fa khanza ngale i kun'wana la.
The lioness was caught in the wire snare by its paw under a tree that was fallen over. Kongota gets onto this tree. First mistake.
Khongot a rule ngale a ku ya no khome jeto mtame la dam sundule na dam jeto mtame la dana mu.
Kongod, I don't know if I can. Kongod starts to throw profanity at that lion.
Se ngale le yo ba ko ila dam khome I feel like ko I ware khome I thelin za ku I feel like
That lioness is trying to get a hold of Kongod, but it's being yanked back because it's caught by the paw, by the wire snare.
Khongot a yehla nsinya la sa a fesa ngale so tota.
Kongota gets down from the tree. Now he's on ground level with the lion. What Kongota didn't notice is with all this yanking, this wire snare is making its way slowly over the lion's paw. Kongota gets on ground level. He's going to now dispatch this lion. And he wants to spear that, lion breaks free. Kongota is a Shangaan speaking man, but in that moment starts to speak Zulu. He says, Jubi is broken. Kongota turns to run. Marshall turns and runs, and his jacket starts to this as he runs. Kongota sprints back towards the village. Renias' mother is grinding corn in the village. Marshall runs past Renias' mum and says, "Get inside, get inside, his mum. Kongota is coming. He's coming with the lions." That lioness takes off after Kongota. Kongota sees that lioness gaining on him quickly. Kongota starts to run zigzag like a fox would from a jackal. The lion goes the short distance. On Kongota's third turn to the left, lioness ankles Kongota. Kongota lands on the ground like this, pretends he's dead. The lioness breaks over in this dust. Renias loses visual for a while. Kongota pretends he's dead. The villagers are banging pots, there's mayhem, people are screaming and shouting. As the dust thing, Renias sees the lioness coming and bites him on the buttock. Kongota pretends he's dead. With all the mayhem, they manage to unnerve the lion. The lion leaves Kongota and starts heading back towards the game reserve. Let me give you the direct translation here for a minute. Kongota lifts his head as slowly as a mushroom grows.
Look, I was saying that good area.
The lion leaves him because the lion leaves him and he lifts his head and he tells the lion, come, you've bitten me already, come finish me off, come finish me off.
Look, and
The lioness turns to look at him and pretends he's dead again.
The
The lioness runs back into the game reserve. He says, people come here, you're okay, he's full of dust. He says, no, I'm absolutely fine. Concord is so full of dust you can't see him. Only when he opens his eyes and smiles can you see there's a human being standing there. People came around him to see if he was alright. Half an hour later, Concord can't walk. Concord is dragging his left leg. The people said to him, no, we must take you to the hospital. They take him, the doctor takes his pants off, he says, apparently the canine went this deep into his butt. The doctor says, I don't know how he knows this, but the doctor says, you're lucky because you got a big buttock. And the mampur saved his life. The lion bit the mampur. Otherwise, it would have broken his spinal cord. Kongota came back from hospital, took his cars, gone, he's never been back again. Told everybody that he'd been bewitched. Since that day, Renias has never seen Kongota back in Dixie. That's the story of Kongota. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everybody. If there are any questions, you're happy to take them. And if you thought this was a free evening, it's not. Please give us a testimonial. That would be very helpful. And thank you very much for being such a wonderful audience. Thank you.
Guys, are there any questions? Any questions? Can bring your mic.
What's the most difficult animal to track?
Oklamul. A leopard. A hen dove. It's a small body that's light, and they tread very lightly, and they leave very faint footprints. They don't follow logical paths often. They often go in circles and. It's possible, but you got to take your time. You got to be patient with leopard. We measured the trackers at Londolozi, and they were good trackers there. The average was a 22% strike rate for successfully tracking and finding the leopard. And versus lion at 70+%.
Any other questions, guys?
Yes.
So, your live video earlier, it shows the danger rating 9 out of 10. So, what's the 10 out of 10?
Probably a hippo. Yeah. Or an injured buffalo. At Londolozi, we've had. Three or four of our staff have been taken by hippo over the years that I've been there. Yeah, if you get caught between the water and it or its calf, The hippo doesn't read the theory. They don't give you a mock charge. They just come. Yeah. Yes.
A long course. So monkeys, squirrels, francolin. What do you trust when it comes to a long course?
You want to answer the?
Leswi swi nga ni twisi ngopfu i nkawa.
The ones that you can rely on are monkeys.
Xa vumbirhi ku lexi xa muncindana.
And kudus and tree squirrels. Yeah. Impala often lie. They'll see a warthog in the grass and they'll start to alarm.
O mundi.
Or they'll see a duiker or something like that. Yeah.
Could you speak a word of Shangaan when you arrived at London?
No.
Da.
No. And he couldn't speak English either. We taught each other with hand signals and things, and slowly it developed. I can read it okay and write it okay, but probably on a grade 8 kind of level. No, but speaking is okay. Yeah.
Okay. Do you like me to tell you how to learn Shangaan? So every time you're speaking to me in English, I switch to Shangaan. I can hear you.
It was very frustrating for a long time. Yeah. But he was good that way. Yes. Did your dad find you in Dixie?
Oh yeah, he was fake.
Yeah, he got there. Yeah.
Maar it take I'm sure a week of Dixie. After my name all along.
About a week later. Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
With the permit.
Permit omkomen. You got a permit. Yeah. But you didn't need it.
Yeah. Too late.
Yeah. The general manager of Mala Mala actually allowed them to go through. Yeah.
In the midday.
Yeah.
No, I'm talking about. In the midday before arrive.
Would you give the same advice if one encountered an elephant?
Yeah. You got to stand. Yeah. Yes.
Except the snake. So that's why don't run in the bush for snake. I don't think I'll stand. I'll be gone.
Is that because that's the right thing to do or because you're scared?
It's probably a bit because he's scared. no, but the snake, you're trying to move away. Yeah, quite quickly. Yeah.
So, like you say, stand your ground, right? But there must be times when you
Yeah, they are. You got to read the situation, but that's your default. You stand until you know what's going to happen, and normally you can tell if it's going to follow through or if you can get to cover. But often people make the mistake they think they can get from here to there and the elephant standing at the bar. The elephant will beat you there before you can get to there. And even an elephant, a hippo, and that's the mistake they make. But I remember in Malawi, in southern Malawi, Majete, we taught the field rangers there to track, and we got charged by a black rhino one day. And this rhino came from a long way off, like 300 meters. So we had ample time to make a decision. So Ren says, we got to get up these trees. So we climbed up the tree. I was first up the tree. Ren came behind me, and Ren had a big, heavy backpack. He also got a bit of a front pack too. and as the rhino screamed up to the base of the tree, the branch that Ren was in broke. And it came crashing down. And this rhino, I don't think it ever seen a human of Ren's size coming from the heavens. And it turned and it went off. Yes.
When you had to go to Dixie and the whole beginning of the story with the meat, you said an APU came through. Have we had APUs for so long?
Yeah, and of course.
Hardly.
Yeah, long time.
Hardly.
Yeah, no, Renias's uncle was a man called, I've written in the book about it, his name is called Engine Mhlongo. And the reason he was called Engine Mhlongo was when the APU would chase him, he'd whistle, and he could outrun the anti-poaching people. And he sounded like a steam train because he would whistle, like mockingly whistle at them. And he became known as Engine Mhlongo. And that was That was in the 50s. Yeah. Yeah. No, the anti-poaching units have been the bane of Mhlongo's collective history for a long time.
Yeah, can't.
Jums, you got any chance for one last story?
You want a story?
Huh?
Yeah? Another story, Ren?
In the business of we.
Hi, Steve. So, Ingwele Malamala.
Oh, she's the story as well. Okay. Let the story I saw Malamala, the Asukutira.
Long time ago, Renias worked at Mala Game Reserve in the garden.
So, Soronian White Ranger, I mean, turns out. Le Malamal, our camping wire song about Harris.
There was a small camp there called Harry's.
Say, here's the Aguma, 2 at more and say, the game drive.
2 vehicles, 2 trackers, 2 guides.
So, you are tracker one, that was I got doctor.
This was in the 80s, Erin.
Yeah,
in the 80s. One day, one of the trackers got sick, and the head ranger asked Ren to fill in for the sick tracker.
So, the Panampoons, I mentioned that in the uniform of he, I just want to go overall. And the uniform of Makaka, dog, he lives at the track of Zoo.
Ren wore a blue overall, normal days, but this day, the head ranger came and brought him a nice, shiny, khaki uniform.
Say, take it from there and from an Samako, find the ants, as it they didn't come and lead up on Guanapoons.
Ren was so excited to have this new uniform, he used it as a pillow to sleep that night. So he needs a prop for this one.
Say, the Panampoons, no, say that it don't roll. A boss and that Lina, never good track up and second off him too. Then you know, when my guest.
So he wakes up early in the morning. Now he has to prepare the vehicle for the guests and put the hot water in the cooler box, the hot box and cooler box, etc. He gets everything set up ready. He wants to show that he can take the sick tracker's place. So now Ren has to drive the Land Rover from the staff village to the camp, the guest camp. But he doesn't know how to drive.
He
sees the gear lever's got 1 on it. There's no door on the side of the Land Rover. He turns the vehicle, switches the vehicle on. He knows that he must push the clutch in. He sees R on the thing, he puts it into reverse. So he jerks backwards, he gets it out of the car park, out of the garage. One is forward, he goes forward. All the way around to the guest camp. There's some aloes growing that have been nicely planted. He parks the Land Rover in the aloes. So he scratched the car, he's parked in the aloes. Not off to a good start. He gets himself nicely organized. The guests come out the lodge. They come out to greet him. He doesn't know how to speak English.
Hey, I have seen him done.
He greets them in Shangan. He doesn't know how to speak to them. But anyway, he greets them. They get in the Land Rover and they drive off on the game drive. They cross the Sand River on the drive. He knew from his days with his father that if you want a leopard, you must look in the riverbeds. He went along for about an hour. He only looked in the riverbed. He wanted to find the leopard. He wanted to prove that he was the best tracker. He's very happy because he's sitting close to white people on the back of the car.
ifamba awuri hinkwayo fika ku kahle wisandi kahle basa ka saseke vele mpunzi ma 8 na
They get to an area, flat area of sand in the Sand River. They stop there to give their guests some tea and coffee.
se fika la yima ikipele some out box ni kula box fika tafula kahle
They get everything ready, and he gets the table out for the guests and make tea and coffee.
se lo arrange avutsamna tia mna coffee la va coffee whatever va la so
And everyone gets served.
se disuka ndizentwa bama tipe
So now Ren decides he needs to go and relieve himself in the bush. So he walks away from where the guests are having their tea and coffee.
se ndijana famba antsanga hayi vula basa la
He says, very nice to be with my people today, but I must go have my pee.
ni famba ndi ahlathini la
He goes around the bush.
ni fika ndiyimo
He's not having a pee.
lo ndika ndi bama la se uleshiko
I don't think I need to translate that. Something making that sound in the bush in front of him.
se hayi be banoni famba bukan bukan
Maybe it doesn't know. Maybe it's an aeroplane flying over.
se ndayima ndaphinda futhi ushisi bakalona ayisitilo yini
He doesn't know what it is, and he turns around.
se ndijaka ndibuye la kama guest enzana me
He comes back to his guests and his range having their coffee.
inkinga ishingiza angakushingiza mashikoti nishangashdiv
The ranger doesn't speak any Shanga, no Fanagalo. Renias doesn't speak in English. He tries to explain something's going on there in the bush.
se ndirikaya antitho nto sivashiterisa so bishimwe stisa onshini
He says, maybe it's that animal with the spots on.
irishto kwenu ayishto la
So the ranger kind of gets what Renias is saying, and they get load back on the car.
se la ifaka makatela ifaka makofi la mayani se kwibhandi ngayisayakubika ibhandi esikukuze akafambi kuyibuyana
They get driving, and Renias is sitting on the back seat, and they drive off. They drive up a road close to this bush where he just had his pee.
loko ikare famba so la movha sibokubhasi la kubhasi ma kunjani sikabzanzi ukuthi zifale la movha lifamba ko
So this track, this road's got like a middle baniki with lots of grass growing in the middle. There's a two-track here.
izihlambe tshame magesti enzaka ngule angule ngibona kahle liso legulile
He's sitting in the back of the guest. He spots what he thinks is a leopard walking in the road just up ahead.
se xifamba so xifamba enhloko leyi ayite
So as he gets closer, he sees something wrong with this leopard.
lo fikisiwa kale so xifamba so
This leopard's wet on the head.
se vari magesti avo se yingo yo yendlu andisitivi
The guest says, what's wrong with this leopard?
xitori xa mehe xe mhamala herisi
He says, no, I must have peed on its head. That's just an anecdote. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. Thanks so much.